see them and to be able to respond. That lets me know if I'm addressing the issues that are most concerned to you, or if I need to add something that we don't already have. So let's get started. Okay, our agenda. We're going to try to cover four broad topics. First of all, what is effective assessment? What tools do I have to do assessment? Participants engaged in making a plan. So I've got an agenda that is kind of things that I've got that I want to cover, but I'm also interested in what your concerns are. So I've listed some of those concerns for you to take a look at and see what you think you need from this session and how you think we can help. So if you will go ahead and do that. Okay, so it looks like the two major areas of concern, if I'm reading them right, are knowing exactly what information I should be gathering and getting my participants actively engaged. And we're certainly going to try to cover both of those topics as effectively let's start then with what is effective assessment. And by effective, I mean what is assessment and what produces the results that I'm looking for. That's what I mean by effective. What gives me what it is that I need. So we're going to start with the goal of assessment. Very often people think of assessment is to see where this participant is now. Now, not where I wish he or she were, but where they actually are. Now, the outcome of assessment might not be a plan immediately, and that's not its purpose. Its purpose is to see where this person is now. So, what do I want from assessment? What makes it effective? First, or to them. I did not think of it as much as a partnership as I began to think of it later. That if I want, and I do want a partnership with people from the beginning, then the partnership begins with assessment. So that means then that not only do I want to see where they are, so I can figure out how to help, I need my participant to see where they are, because they're the one that has to make the changes that I need them to make in order to get the outcomes that I want. So this needs to be a partnership between the two. More on assessment at the beginning, because I know less about where the person is. It's going to be ongoing throughout the process. So what does that mean? Once the person has made a plan, then we will reassess. What's working, what's not working, what do we need to change? As we move into the resources that we're going to use, we're going to reassess again. which resources are working, what do I need to add, what do I need to modify. As I move their involvement with me. Okay, somebody's telling me the audio is in and out. Is that better? Steve, is that better? Yes, no? Okay.
Beverly, I think you sound fine. I think the problem could be with the internet connection.
Okay, okay, all right, okay. Just want to make sure I'm not messing up. On this person. They'll have pieces of information on themselves. The result of the assessment ought to be a picture that the participant and I can use to figure out how do we move forward. In this picture, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to put this picture together, in this picture ought to be four parts that allow me to put the picture together. Motivators, what don't they like about their lives, what do they want to be different, strengths, what strong points do they have for making change, barriers, what problems do they have to solve that are standing in their way, and resources, what outside supports are they bringing with them. So each of these pieces allow me to put together a picture to see where they are now, and then how do we move forward. Lastly, I have begun to think about how to use assessment to influence doing something as quickly as possible. We've got limited amount of time to work with them, so the quicker we can get them going, the more effectively we're going to be able to get the outcome. So we're going to talk about how to use assessment to not just gather information, but to get people to do something differently than what they're doing now, to influence them to change. Okay, so I want to put a picture together of where this person is now. I've got some tools that I have to help me put the pieces of the puzzle together, the pieces of the picture together. In my toolbox, I've got the application. That's usually the first tool I have. And it gives me kind of an overview of where this person is now. It tells me something about their work history, their education, who's in their family, the sources of income, health issues, legal issues. All of this begins. That's the whole picture. That's a piece of the picture. It gives me a preliminary picture. And the reason these elements are important is because they all affect employment. All of these things affect the person's ability to become employed. So I'm going to look at the application to see what information do I have that's helping me begin to put this picture together. Data that indicates to me reading and math level. Where's their academic level? Now again, I don't want to overinterpret that, because reading and math scores can tell me about academic level. It can't tell me what they know from their work experience that might not show up on a test. It can't tell me if their reading or math level is low, how motivated they are to do something about that. So that's another piece of the picture, but I've got to be careful not to overinterpret that piece of data. Aptitude tests. What abilities do they have as reflected what career interests they might have. Now again, career interest tests can tell me, can give me a piece of information. They can tell me whether people are interested in something. They can't tell me really whether the person really wants to do what it is that they're interested in. So as I look at the test data, and testing again is not assessment, it's a piece of the assessment puzzle that I'm putting together along with the application. And third tool I may have is information or something else that tells me what services have they received already, what resources have they used. So that's another piece of information I've got. Now again, I have to be careful that if I've got information from other sources, that I don't use that information, that I don't interpret that information before I've had a chance to really talk to this person. So I've got an application itself. So I'm going to use all of those tools, the application, the testing, the information from other sources, along with the interview, to help me pull together the pieces of this puzzle, so that I'm getting each one of them is helping me bring into focus who this person is and where they are of the assessment, and I think the most critical part of the assessment. Now, in the assessment interview, again, this is a partnership. So there are some goals I have, some things that I want to accomplish out of the assessment, and there are going to be some goals I have for the participant as well. So let's look at what some of my goals are for the assessment. That I can use the assessment to begin to build the partnership. Very often people say, I want to build a relationship. I think I want a particular kind of relationship. I want a partnership that expects something of the participant and expects something of me. The idea that this is going to be a partnership, and if I want a partnership, then the partnership should begin at assessment. The interview will give me something the application can't give me, the testing can't give me, the information from other sources can't give me. It'll give me more insight into the participants' attitudes and feelings. For example, I know that they have work experience. What I don't know is what they think about that work experience, how they feel about that work experience. I know that they are it's a problem, do they see the need to do anything about it? So the interview is the only place really where I can get some insight into how people think and how they feel. The third thing I want to use my interview for is ammunition. My job, I think, is to get them to make some changes in their lives. So I'm looking for information to continue when problems occur. So I'm looking for what I can use to influence change. Because the problem I've always got is the participant is in control of the outcome. I can't make them do anything. But the assessment will give me ammunition I can use to influence what they do. Can't make them do it, but I can influence what they do. And the assessment interview is a good place for me to begin to gather the ammunition I need to influence them to make some changes. to see where they are. And I want them to use what they see to do three things. First of all, I want the assessment to get them to see I need to change. That I don't like where my life is now, that I want that to be different. As we said in our last discussion, people come at different levels of readiness. Some people come seeing the need to change, and so I don't have to do very much. Some people don't see very much of a need to change. I see that they need to change. They may not see that. So I want to use the assessment process to see if I can influence them to say to themselves, I need to. What I'm asking them to do is not impossible. That they have the strength and resources. They're bringing strength and resources with them that will get them to say to themselves, I can do this. I have enough strength to do this. The barriers I have are not insurmountable. The third thing I want the assessment to do for the participant is to get them ready to make a plan. Because planning is going to be the second step of the process, and I want them to be ready. How do I make this plan work so that I can get started? See, I don't think we have a lot of time to waste. This is why I don't want to use assessment just to gather information or complete a form. I need to get them ready to do something as quickly as I possibly can because I've got outcomes to meet in a relatively short time. Okay, so we've got goals for the assessment interview for both me and the participant, and I've got a form usually that I'm going to be using to help me do this assessment interview. Now, the assessment interview, the assessment form, I think, primarily helps me structure the conversation. It kind of helps me look at what pieces of their lives do I need to be looking at. Their work experience, their education, their family composition, their health issues, their One of the things I have to be careful about, however, is that I don't allow the form to drive the interview, but rather to guide the interview. Because as I ask the question, I'm also listening for their answers to the question and following up with other questions that might not be on the form. So I don't want the assessment form to become something that I just complete. Rather, it is something that I use to try to structure and guide the conversation that I'm going to have with this person. I also want to use the form to actively engage people in their own self-assessment. And we're going to talk about how to do that, how to get Okay, remember as I'm talking, if you think of things you want to ask or comments you want to make, just type them in and send them to me. Now, before I start the interview, I need to do some preparation. It's kind of like going to a doctor and you assume that before they talk to you, they've looked at your test, they've looked at the form you filled out, if you're allergic to any medications, they don't just walk in the door and say, hey, I need to do the same kind of preparation for the interview. I need to, first of all, review my data. What information do I already have? Because I certainly don't want to ask in the interview information I've already got. So I'm going to review the application. I'm going to review any test data I have. I'm going to review the information from other sources prior to that person walking in the door because I need to use the interview time I've got, which is usually very if you can think of that 10 minutes of that hour perhaps as the review time before the person walks into the door, so you feel prepared to have something of a preliminary picture of the person that you've got. Here are the questions I want to ask as I review my data. What do I know? What facts do I have? And again, I have to be careful distinguishing between facts and my interpretation of those facts. So I'm looking just at the basic spoken to them yet, but what do I know? What facts do I have? The second thing I want to ask as I review my data is, what questions do I need to ask? What is it I don't know? What's not obvious from the data that I have? And again, what that does is allow me not to ask questions I already have the answers to, but to ask new questions that will both provide information to me and insight to the participant as well. What concerns, third question, what concerns is this person likely to have? So for example, if I see on the form, I ask, do you have reliable transportation? They say no. Well, one of the concerns they're likely to have is child care. So I can start to get myself ready to address those concerns. Now, I don't have to address them right away, but at least I've got them in my head as to the concerns they're likely to have that I'm going to need to address. What the preparation does is allow me to use the limited time I've got with that person as effectively as possible. My time is limited. I don't have control always over how much time I have. I certainly don't have control over the participant that I have. What facts do I have? What questions do I need to ask? What is it I don't know? And what concerns is this person likely to have, so that I'm in my head at least thinking about how I might be able to address those concerns. Okay, we're now into the interview, and I want to think about, how do I introduce this? Because I know what I want. I want to to begin to see where they are now. So how do I introduce the interview in a way that sets the stage for that? Because how I introduce the interview also affects how well I am able to control the interview and use my time effectively. So let's start with what not to start with, the don'ts, what I should not start with. Requirements, rules, and regulations. If I start off with, here are the requirements of the program, here are the rules we have to people with their backs up, already angry with me about, this is particularly true if people were mandated to be there, if they're there under some requirement or rule. Then if I start off with the rules and regulations, what I can remind them of is, I'm the one with the power, you're powerless, and then I can talk about the rules and regulations, but I can choose at which point I want to do that. I don't have to start off with that, because it gives me some negativity that I don't want from the beginning. Sometimes people come hostile, and starting with rules and regulations makes them more hostile. Sometimes they didn't come hostile, but starting with rules and regulations creates hostility that I don't need. Instead of you controlling what you talk about, the participant controls what you talk about. Participant gains control of what you talk about. So while you're here today, let's me as a participant set the agenda. And what you want to do is set the agenda yourself. If you say, how can I help you? Well, what you started off with is, what this can convey to the person is, my job is to do stuff for you. Your job is to ask for stuff, and my job is to give it to you. And since I want to partner, what it is that we're going to talk about. Program jargon. One of the tasks I think we have is to translate Fed talk into regular people talk, into language that regular people can understand and use. And we're like every other profession. We all have our jargon, and we talk jargon to each other. And the jargon often feels confusing to the person who's there, and it can make them feel like we're doing this deliberately to confuse them. Who is that? I didn't know. I thought I just lost my job. I didn't know I was dislocated. Dislocated worker is the name of a funding stream we have. It's not the definition of a person. So a better example is this. Our program helps people who have been laid off. That's me. Get back to work as quickly as possible. That's what I want. I don't care what your program is named. I don't really care how it's funded. I don't care about anything else other than that. I want to feel you are here today so we can do an assessment on you. Well, first thing I think is, wonder what that is. Doesn't sound very good. Don't think I want one of those. So there's no need to use that particular jargon because it doesn't help the person understand why they are there. So I can say instead, let's start by seeing where you are now, which is the definition of assessment, and what's the purpose of that, so we can develop a plan for moving forward. So what I'm conveying to the person is, without using I'm defining what we're going to do and what the purpose is of doing that, instead of the jargon of assessment, which doesn't mean anything to anybody but me and my coworkers, and unnecessarily confused. Is to get the person talking to me rather than me talking to them. I want them to tell their story, because the assessment is about where they are, not where I am. Now, we do this very often to try to build a relationship with people, to say to people, I understand what you're going through, I've been there myself. Well, part of the problem with that is you really don't understand what I'm going through, because all of us believe for example, a single parent. Yeah, but you're not a single parent like I'm a single parent. So we believe our experiences are absolutely unique. So instead of building the relationship, telling your story too soon can distance the person from you. Found a job, help me. And it doesn't encourage me to talk, which is what you want. Better example, being laid off can be very stressful. What that communicates to the person without saying I've been where you are is I understand the stresses that you have, followed by effectively. that I do understand where you are without saying I've been through that myself, because I may not have been through that myself. And even if I have, it's not the same as theirs. And then follows up with a question that gets them okay. So we don't start off with program jargon, rules and requirements, why are you here, telling your own story. What do we start off with? Oh, there's a form. Off with addressing problems or barriers. Now the reason for that is if I ask them for their problems, then they're going to drag now. If now I've gotten distracted. Now we're working on transportation. They are. It also says to the person, I'm here to do this for you. We talk about barriers. One is that we talk about resources once you have a plan. And we don't have a plan yet. So it's premature to talk about what kind of transportation they need because we don't have a plan for how they're going to look for work. The second thing is that it conveys again that this is something that I'm going to be doing for you rather than with you. So a better response would be once we have a plan, you and I can talk about how to deal with some of the problems standing in your way. What that conveys because you're eligible for it. And the last part of it says, let's start with looking at your work experience. Now again, what I'm doing is setting the agenda. This is where I think we need to start. And so I'm going to set the agenda so that I can keep the focus on where I want to go and again use the limited time that I've got effectively. So, okay. Now this seems really simple, and you shouldn't even have to say it, to greet people with a smile and a handshake. But I've said in a lot of interviews where that didn't happen. So if I want people to feel as though they're a guest with me, and when guests come to my home, I greet them with a smile and a handshake. What that says to them is, I'm glad you're here. Welcome, I'm glad you're here. Again, very often when fine. I've got plenty of money, no worries in my life. I just thought I'd come by the workforce center and see what you got. Something's gone wrong in their lives. They've lost a job, they've lost income. Something has happened that brought them to the workforce center. So I think the smile and handshake says to the person initially, you're in the right place. You're in a place where people are glad you are here. Introduce yourself and your role. Who are you? How are you going to be able to know what benefit that person is going to be to me? Better example, I'm Barbara Jones, your employment counselor. I will be working with you to help you find work as quickly as possible. Now what that says again is that there's a purpose for me being here. And the purpose for me is to be working with you. Notice the language. Not I will be helping you, but I will be working with you to help you find work as quickly as possible, because that's why I'm there. Less interested in your title, less interested in how long you've been there, less interested in what the Workforce Center does, but more interested in how will you I think sometimes we behave unintentionally as though people had to show up, especially if they were mandated. But they didn't. They could have done something else. They could have slept in. They could have watched reruns of Law and Order. They could have done anything else other than coming in. So I think it's important to say to people, thank you for I'm more likely to reduce the hostility people have, reduce the defensiveness people have, reduce the stress they have if I thank them for taking the time to meet with me, because I appreciate them doing that. In fact, if they don't show up, if enough of them don't show up, pretty soon I don't have a job. So I probably why did you bring me in here today? For example, I would like to get to know you. Well, if I'm the participant, your getting to know me may not be a priority in my life. I'm more interested in what's in this for me. What will be the benefit to me of spending this next hour with you? So a better example might be, let's begin with the two of us. Again, that says partnership. Getting a picture of where you are now. Well, what's the purpose of the picture? Then you and I, because what I want this to sound like is a person talking to a person, so that I can get them actively engaged in working with me. And I'm defining what the purpose is going to be for the interview and setting the agenda so I can keep some control over what the discussion is that we're going to have. To establish a partnership from the beginning. For example, my job is to help those barriers for me. Well, I don't have any transportation, I don't have any child care, I don't have any clothes to wear. Then it becomes a laundry list of things for you to do, you as the employment specialist to do, rather than anything that I have to do. So again, better example, you and I, that should be, will work together to solve the problems that make finding work difficult. Sorry. From barriers to solve the problems. You see, barriers can connote, well, you may or may not be able to do this. solve the problem says to me, we're going to get this done. We just got to figure out how. And I want them to think of themselves, think of us, our work together, as solving problems rather than simply naming have. Because right now I don't have anything else but my words. I don't have a relationship yet. I don't have anything, I don't know them well enough yet. So the words I use become critical in setting the stage for what I want to have, happen. Okay, so I want them to be actively engaged. I want them to do most of the talking. How do I get them to do that? Well, the most critical skill, other than listening, I'm going to have in the interview is asking the right question. This is open questions. Closed questions are the kinds that people can answer yes or no, so they don't require people to talk or to think. They begin with do you, can you, will you, have, are you, have you. So I want to avoid those as much as possible. And we're going to talk a little bit later because generally assessment forms are full of these. And so you're going to have to be good at moving those closed questions into open. What an open question looks like instead of a closed question. So if you'll take a few minutes and look at the questions that we've got and identify the ones you see as open questions. Ones that get people to think and to talk, as opposed to just answer yes or no. Does the slide up? Okay, there we are. It shows the poll is closed. Oh, here, okay, here's coming. Again, open questions, closed questions begin with do you, can you, will you, have you, are you. So what kind of work are you interested in? Open question. Would you be interested in a job search class? I can answer that one yes or no. Can you start training next week? Same thing, I can answer that one yes or no. Do you have someone who could help you with a ride? Yes or no. So those are the kinds of questions I want to avoid, and I want to use the open questions. I want to think now again, if you ask a closed question and you get a yes-no answer, just slap yourself. You can always go back and open it up. But the yes-no is an indicator that that was a closed question. They eat up your time without providing any new information to you or any insight to the participant. The other kind of question we talked about that's very common is thinking versus non-thinking questions. Non-thinking questions ask people to respond to information they already know. And very often those questions were asked on the assessment form. So they're asking, so if I ask them in the interview again, I'm really wasting from the assessment is to learn something about themselves they may not have thought about or considered before. So, polling question. Which of the following are thinking questions? The poll open? Okay. Which of the following are thinking questions? How long have you lived at this address? How do you feel about the amount of education you have? How were you able to get your last job? What was your last job title? What was your job title? Who is your current child care provider? So good job. Good job. How long have you lived at this address? I knew the answer to that one already when I walked in the door. Doesn't ask me to think. Waste my time. How do you feel about the amount of education you have? Good thinking question. How much education do you have is a non-thinking question because I already knew that. How do you feel about the amount of education you have is a thinking question. Because if we're going to talk about going back to school, I need some insight, and they do too, into how do they feel about what they've got. How were you able to get your last job? Again, what was your last job is a non-thinking question. How were you able to get your last job is a thinking question. What was your job title? Not a very good thinking question because I probably know the answer to that. There are better questions I can better question. Child care provider. I already know that too. Now, if I wanted to ask a thinking question, I might be able to ask, what works about your child care provider? What doesn't work? What problems do you have? What strengths are in there? But that's a question I would already know the answer to. Now, again, if I want those kinds of answers, I need to put them on the form, let the person answer them themselves. I'm looking for strength then. I'm trying to get them to see strength. So those are better thinking questions. Thank you. Good job. Good job. Okay. Follow-up questions. Okay. Very often on the form, we will have yes to the question, are you currently enrolled in school or training? And I need to ask a follow-up question because that was a closed question. So, a couple of options. Where are you attending school? Now, most of you could see that's a non-thinking question. They already know that. Better question. What do you like most about the Often, since my form asks closed questions, I'm going to need to ask a good thinking follow-up question so I'm not repeating questions that have already been asked. Let's look at the second example of a follow-up question. Participant responds cashier to the question on your form, what was your last job? Follow-up question. Guy, you girls are give me any new information doesn't make them think. What did you do well on that job? Much better follow-up question, because what I want them to be able to do is identify skills they had, strengths they had, because see what they're going to have to sell on an application or an interview is what they were good, not just that they did the job, but what they did well on the job, because that's what they're going to need to sell to a new employer, so I want them to begin thinking about that right now. Good work. Good work. Okay. So, view what I shouldn't start with, what I should start with, and how to ask good questions. The last part of our session is going to be on building an assessment picture. How do I take all the things that I'm learning from the application, from the testing, from the information from other sources, and from the interview, and put together this picture? Because people are a puzzle. We're complicated creatures. And part of my task is to put together the picture and help them put together a picture so they can participant that I made up. This is Johnny Sparks, and so this is a summary of the information that we have on Johnny. He's 27. He's on parole after serving 3 years in prison for selling drugs, so I know he's an ex-offender. He recently completed a drug rehab program. He dropped out of high school in the 11th grade. He went to Job Corps, but he lives off and on with his sister and a girlfriend, has a 7-year-old son whom he sees regularly. He says he has been looking for work for a month without success. So these are the picture. This is the preliminary picture that I have of Johnny. Now, these are the pieces in the puzzle. What I want to be able to do is put that puzzle together with 4 parts. I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for 4 things to help me and Johnny put this picture together. Motivators. What does he not like about his life now? What does he want to be different? Strengths. What has he got going for him that'll make it possible for him to find employment? Resources can I bring, but what resources is he bringing with him that will help us, that will help him be able to do what it is that he needs to do? So those are the pieces of the picture that we're going to put together. Now again, not only do I need to see these, but Johnny needs to see these as well. So we start with motivation, because one of the things we want to impact is to get Johnny to see the need to change. And motivation is wants. So we're now going to look at, okay, what could possibly be motivators for Johnny? Now, these aren't things that I know at this point, but are possibilities of things that might be motivators as I look at the picture that I have for him. Based on? Well, we know that he sees him regularly. We don't know what the relationship is about. We don't know anything else about it. But the fact that he sees him regularly is an indicator that that could be a possible motivator for Johnny. How do we find out? We're going to ask him. We don't know this to be true. This is guesswork on our part, but it's an educated guess based on the data that we have. Not completing high school. Not a motivator. School, work, and money are not motivators. It's what those things can't do for us or buy us. So the question, what might bother him about not completing high school, that's where the motivation is. Is it the inability to do things for his son? Same thing with a job. Job is not a motivator. It's what you can't do, what you can't buy because you don't have a job. Living arrangements. Why do you think that's a good one? What does the data tells us? He lives off and on with a sister and a girlfriend. Now, you know if you live with somebody else, they've got rules and regulations. You got to listen to a good possibility, not a sure thing, that this may be an uncomfortable situation. I don't know that. Guesswork. Guesswork based on the data that I have that he's living off and on with them, meaning he doesn't have a stable place to live. What he can't do for himself. Another good possibility. That if he's not working, I would suggest being on parole might be a motivator. Why? You get hassled when you're on parole. You've got to report to somebody. You may have to take drug tests. Usually you're being hassled about work. So that might be another source of things that are miseries or discomfort in his life. Now again, I don't know that these things are true. But as a professional, understanding what I do about motivation, I've got at least possibilities of things that I can ask. Because if I ask, what don't you like about your life? That's too broad a question that assumes he's already thought about it. But if I can ask more specific questions, I can now we're going to look at the questions we might ask. What could we ask? What questions could we ask? Now again, our questions need to be open and they need to make him think. Because these are not, I'm looking for two things here. To get Johnny to see his motivators, I'm looking for ammunition I can use to get him started and to keep him going once he gets started. Because I know something's going to happen. He's going to start going and he's going to fall back. The change he makes is going to be 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, 5 steps. Ammunition I need to keep him moving forward. And what questions can I ask that will get him to see what he does not like about his life, what he might want to be different. Okay, what would you like to do for your son that you can't do now? We recognize that one as a good question. It focuses on him on why he might want to work or why he might want to go back to school or do any of the other things that like where he is now. He wants to something better. Don't you want a better life for your son? Closed question. And it also can sound accusatory without meaning to. Don't you want a better life for your son? It doesn't require him to think. It doesn't require him to respond with anything other than yes or no. When you're trying to get people to talk, the more closed questions you ask, the easier you make it for them not to not say anything. And it's like pulling teeth. When you ask a closed question, you have to follow it up with an open one. Eats up your time. How do you feel about your living arrangement? Information I got. What the interview is designed to do is tell me how he feels about his living arrangements. and to get him to talk about how he feels about it. Here's my hope, that he does not like where his living arrangements. He wants something different. I'm looking for what might push him out of his comfort zone to make some changes. How does your sister feel about your living with her? Now, that's an open question, and it's a thinking question. But here's the problem with that question. It gets John give them the opportunity to talk about somebody else, they will talk about somebody else rather than talking about themselves. I don't want Johnny talking about how his sister feels. I want him looking at how he feels. So I always think, if during the assessment process, if you're doing especially during the motivation piece, if people are squirming in the chair, good job. That says to you, you've got them wrestling with themselves. You've got them thinking and looking about their own lives, and with the goal of getting them ready to make some changes. So be careful about and try to avoid questions that ask people to talk about someone else other than themselves. He doesn't like about his life, what he wants. We want to, there's two goals to the responses that we get. Johnny will begin to see the need to change. I will begin to have ammunition I can use to keep pushing on him to make changes. Those are my two goals from these questions. That he's going to see the need to change. I'm going to begin to get ammunition, and I'll begin to get the ammunition of his own words. That's why the questions are so important. The better the question, the better I get him to give me his own words that I can ultimately use back on him. Okay, so the motivators that might push him to make some changes. Where do we go now? Well, if I want him to believe he can change, which is the other goal of this assessment, seems to me I go to strengths now rather than barriers. Because see, what barriers say are, these are all the reasons why you can't make it possible. But strengths say, these are all the things you have going for you to make it possible. The other thing that happens when I look for, programs like ours tend to be barrier obsessed, and the first thing we notice is all the barriers that people have, and it can cause us to overlook strengths. It can cause us to overlook strengths. I think when you look for strengths first, you are more likely to see them. So let's go back to Johnny again. We think can help him make changes. So we've listed some of those strengths, some of the ones that he might have. Which of the following, go ahead and put up the polling question, which of the following do you think are strengths for him? Okay. Interesting. I see you really thinking these through. Good. Okay, I agree with you. Family support, yes. Now, Johnny's family is probably like most of our families, a blessing and a curse. But at least he has some family support, which is better than none at all. He's got at least we know of a sister and a girlfriend, and maybe some other people we don't know about. That as a strength. Yes, I think that says something about, out of all the things he didn't complete, there is something he did complete. The relationship with the son, yes, I would agree, that's a strength. There are perhaps some things some skills, some things he's learned that are transferable to work, about how to maintain that relationship with his son. And I think a self and part of what he's going to have to sell, I think, to an employer is not just his skills and work experience, but also his character. Very few of you thought completed 11th grade was a strength. I would consider that a strength. It's better than 7th, 8th, or 9th grade. It may not be the strength to get to the 11th grade. This must be a young crowd, because very few of you thought youth was a strength. To me, Johnny looks like a very young man. He's young, but with some, 27 is young, but with some life experience. He's not a 55-year-old ex-offender, which is even more problematic. He's a person who's still young, but with some life experience. The fact that he's So when he dropped out of high school, he went to Job Corps. When that didn't work, he tried a training program. Now, I know the flip side of that is he didn't finish them, but he also kept starting stuff. He kept trying something to make his life better. So I think that when we have to really focus on strengths, I think looking for work is a strength. He's not better than none at all. And basically, I don't think we're comparing Johnny to everybody in the world, but of the population that we deal with, he's got some considerable strengths that he can use. I would suspect that Johnny sees his barriers that what we're asking him to do is not impossible. Because if he doesn't believe he can do this, and he's got a tough road, looking for work as an ex-offender. If he doesn't believe he can do this, he won't even try. So part of what we do when we look for strengths is they don't have to be perfect strengths. Sometimes I think we can think of them as better than. 11th grade is better than 7th, 8th, 9th grade. Starting a training program, so we look for we train ourselves to look for all the strengths he has. And I think it's really important that we do that before we look for barriers. Because if we look for barriers first, we won't even see the strengths, that are there. Okay, So now we're going to look at, all right, what questions do we need to ask Johnny Okay, remember, the strengths questions are designed to get him to see that not only does he have the strength, but how he made the strength happen. So they're designed to be open questions. They're designed to be thinking questions. Part of what I think we have to get better at least I had to get better at, was asking fewer questions, but better questions. Having my questions have Okay, how we doing? Okay, so nobody thought, why did you leave your last job, was a strength question. That's because you're absolutely right. It's a barrier question. It's a barrier question. What did you do to get enrolled in the training program? Good strengths question. Because see, rather than where are you enrolled or what was the name of the training program, that question asked him to think about what did you have to do to get yourself enrolled? Because another training program, we can take him back to, but look what you did last time, so that he can begin to see the skills that transfer from getting enrolled before to getting enrolled again. How were you able to complete the rehab program? Again, I think a good strengths question, what did you have to do to be able to complete that program? Because if he didn't complete Job Corps, he didn't complete training, what made this doable? Was there something in him that made this doable that I can use again as ammunition when he tells me he can't do something difficult? So again, trying to get him to see his strengths. I'm also trying to get ammunition so that he can, so that I can use those strengths. So where he is now, but it also provides me ongoing ammunition throughout the process that I can use when we get to a plan, when we get to implementation, when we get to follow up. All throughout the process, I've got ammunition I can use. What kind of help does your family give you? Not a bad question, but not a really good strength question. A better strength question might be, how do you get your family to give you help? You see, I'm looking for strengths he has, what he does to make things happen. So a better question might be, how do you get your sister and girlfriend, how do you get them to help you? What do you have to say to people to get them to help you? A strengths question, instead of why did you leave your last job, how were you able to hold on to the job as long as you did? Now, we're going to get to the barriers, but for right now, we're making our question focus on the strengths. Okay, so the second piece of the picture is beginning to come into focus. We've got indications of motivations. We've got indications of strengths. Now we need indications of barriers. What's standing in the way? And I like to use the process in this sequence. It seems to work better if I start with motivators, go to strengths, then barriers, then resources, because each one of them builds on the other. Because my goal is not just to collect information, my goal is to try to influence Johnny at him again. I'm going to look at him 4 different ways. All right. What's standing in his way? What's standing in his way? Okay, ready for the polling question. Okay, most of you saw all of these as barriers. You're absolutely correct. Now, if you notice something, however, the number of barriers we found was smaller than the number of strengths we found, I think. Again, we're trained to look for barriers rather than to look for strengths. I don't know about your assessment form, but very often what I see is that a great many of them will have a place for barriers, but no place for strengths. If yours has a place for strengths, good for you. That's a plus. That's not usually the case that I see. I see not just the composite of the sum total of their barriers, they're the sum total of their strengths and barriers as well. So he has some barriers. He has some strengths. He did get to the 11th grade. He does have some family support. He did start Job Corps. He does have a relationship with his son. He's got all those strengths, and he's got some barriers standing in the way. Now, part of what we want him to see is that to do is and say, well, might as well shoot myself, there's no point in trying because this is insurmountable. This is why we don't do barriers first. We do strengths first so that we can see those, so that we can get him to see those barriers in the context of his strengths. Because I need him, in spite of those barriers, to try. Okay, let's look at the kinds of questions we might ask then to get him to take a look at the barriers. Why is that a bad question? He already knew the answer to that. It's not a thinking question. It doesn't give us any insight that we didn't already have. So it's a wasted question. Now again, sometimes it's not that they're awful questions, they're just time-wasting questions. They don't do what it is that we need to do, which is to get him to see where his barriers are and to see them in the context of his strengths. How is your relationship with your son's mother? Here's the problem with that question. It's a drama question. It's a drama question. It can often lead to a long and drawn-out story. And one of the things you have to be really careful about is introducing drama questions because they take your focus off the interview. See, our participants, we can't always get angry with them for doing this drama stuff. We ask the drama question and then we get mired in it and can't get out. So I put this one in there as a way of saying avoid the drama questions at all costs. Now, if you want to ask about the relationship, you might ask, what help would she give you if you were looking for work or going back to school? What help would she give you? What problems might she cause you? But I want to put those in the context of work. I am not his social worker. I am not his marriage counselor or relationship counselor. I'm interested in the people in his life as they relate to how they end of this process. I say to my funding source, Johnny and his son's mother are doing better. I get no credit for that. The first thing they ask me is he working? How long is he working? Did he stay on the job? So to keep my focus on the fact that I'm in his life to work on employment, not to work on relationships with anybody else. How do you, so good questions. What are the top 3 problems you think you would have to solve to language problems to solve to get in his head that we're going to try to figure out how to do something about this. The barrier question encourages people just to name it, to name what the problem is. The problems to solve question tries to encourage them to think about what are you going to do about it. I also found that if you put a number on it, it kind of helps people organize it and think about it better. How do you think your lack of a GED will affect your ability to get hired? Here's what I'm interested. I think it will affect his ability to get hired. Here's the question. Here's the question, though. Does he think so? Because if he doesn't think so, he's probably not going to want to try that. So I want to gain some insight. How do you think your lack of a GED? Now, sometimes when I'm asking these thinking questions, people won't have an answer for it immediately. That's good. I'm getting them to think. Here's what I always hope that my questions will do, that they will go home with Johnny and haunt him in the middle of the night. When he's sitting there watching football or wrestling or whatever else he's watching, that question is in his head and he's having to wrestle with it. See, people can't process that I'm trying to get him to think about things that he may not have thought about before. Okay, so we've got now 3 parts of the picture beginning to come into focus. Motivators, strengths, barriers, last part of the picture. What resources does Johnny have? Very often in the assessment interview is about us talking about resources we have rather than Johnny talking about resources he has. To the table. Does he bring anything that he and I can partner with to make this happen? So let's put up the polling question about possible resources. Which of the following do you think are possible resources? These are outside supports. Who could help Johnny? Okay, good job. What are we seeing? That as we again look at, each time we look at the picture, resources, every time we turn this picture around, we begin to see something else that helps bring this into focus. And part of what we're seeing is that he's got a number of resources he's bringing with him. Now, we don't know the quality of the resources, how helpful they're going to be, how, whether they're going to be consistent. We don't know any of that, but at least we know some resources are there. Now, what we're going to try to do also is to find out, does Johnny see any of these people as had he considered them resources? Had he considered he's 7, which means he's in school, which means that there are possibilities of people that Johnny could talk to at the school about possible job leads, teachers, counselors, principals, so forth and so on. So he might be in another way of resources. We're trying to think of all the people that Johnny knows that might be able to help him with job leads, with transportation, with any of the kinds of things that he has. This is the kind of stretching we're going to need him to do in order to make some changes. See, what I don't want Johnny is to say, here I am, ex-offender, you find me a job. What I want him to say is, here I am, ex-offender, I don't like where my life is, I want it to be better, I've got strengths, I will work with you. To do that. So, questions, polling questions. Now, how do I get him to see this? What questions do I ask that will get him to see this? Would you put up the polling questions for resources? Okay. 5 best questions to ask, get him to explore his resources. Okay, all of you identified the first one. If you decided to work on your GED, who would encourage you? I've learned not to ask the question, who in your life will support you? Decided to do something, who would help you? Because if you think about, there are people in your life, you're not going to do anything for them because they're not doing anything for themselves. But if they decided to do something, you would help. So the if you decided to do something question seem to be a better question than who would encourage you. What resources do you have? Look at that word. What does that word mean to Johnny? That's one of those program jargon words. Okay. What are resources? Help. And in addition, it's a very broad question. It doesn't help him think. If you decided to work on your GED, if you needed help with transportation or needed a ride, who do you have? Might be a better question. But resources is too broad a question, I think, and it's a jargon question. So if I'm looking for resources, it's better probably to ask, if you needed help with a ride, who would you ask? If you needed somebody, if you needed an outfit to go on an interview, who would you, who would you ask? If you needed somebody to put in a good word for you, who would you ask? So those make the questions narrower and more focused and get me, better information. What transportation, think about the places you go and people you see every week. Who might know about job openings? What I'm trying to get Johnny to do is think about the network he has. Places he goes all the time that, that with people he sees, barbershop, grocery store, job openings, because what we know is most jobs are in the hidden job market anyway. They're passed around from people he knows. So to you, think of those people as resources. What transportation help do you need from us? Now remember what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for our resources at this point. I'm looking for Johnny's resources. So the question I'd want to ask if I'm looking for his resources is, who would help you with transportation? Then I can see what I need to do to partner with him, to partner his resources with ours. But if I ask what help he needs from us, he won't talk about what help he already has. And it sets him up to get me to do things for him instead of partner with me to do them. As a result of the interview and the questions we looking for the motivators, we found some possibilities, we asked him about them, we found which of those were most uncomfortable in his life, which of the things he wants most to be different. We looked for strengths. Then we asked him, we helped him see what those strengths were and how he made those strengths happen. Third thing we did is look for barriers or problems to solve and ask questions to see which of those that we saw as barriers did he see as barriers too. And lastly, we looked for resources. What supports is he bringing with him that could help him do this? Now we've got a picture, and Johnny and I can begin to put the picture together so that we can begin to make a plan to change this. Okay, questions and comments. What questions do you have? Talk to me. To me. Where does assessment fall into the application process? I'm not sure what you mean by application. If you're talking about the application that the participant completes, then that's the one I was referring to that we are going to review prior to the assessment interview. That's part of the picture that I'm developing. Now, again, if you think of assessment broadly as a process, and the application, the tests, the interview, and all the rest of those as tools I use to help me do what I use to conduct the assessment, because the purpose of the assessment is to give me a picture of where they are, now. I think applications ought to be done prior to interviews. I think it's a waste of your time to fill out forms with people, waste your interview time filling out forms with people. It seems to me that's something they could do in advance that's something I could look at and then know what questions to ask that are not on the application form or not on the assessment form, and so that I can ask different kinds of questions. I hope that answers it. If not, Kathy, try me again. Thank you. I thought I saw somebody else typing to me. Well, thank you, Trish. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you very much. Thank you. I must have left something out. While you're thinking, while you're control and what parts we don't. There's so many parts we don't control. We don't control the participants we get. We don't control the time we have. We don't control the rules and regulations we have to operate in. But we have real control over the process. And the better the process I do, the better the outcomes I have. So our discussion today was how to control that assessment process so that it gets me the results I want. A better picture of where that person is. And it does something else. It gets them off the duff and ready to get moving. Because I need them moving as quickly as possible so I can move on to somebody else and better my caseload. So if assessment can do both of those, I think that that's going to allow me to the tools that can help you do a good assessment. I got tools for finding motivation, tools for finding strengths, tools for finding right resources, tools for finding barriers, and more in-depth discussion than we were able to do are part of the new Making Case Management Work handbook that is available. I finished it last year. You can order it. I'm having trouble with my website now, but you can order it by emailing me and letting me know you're interested in a copy of the book. I tried to rework the first book so that it was, especially the chapter on assessment, so that it's a much more in-depth treatment than the first one was. The last thing we're going to